Okay, so the next planet we're going to talk about is Saturn. I remember when I was a kid, this was my favorite planet. But I know, like you said, with astrology, I mean, I just loved it because it had the rings around it from an astronomy perspective. But you know, in astrology, this Saturn is associated with the planet of work and maybe lessons. Saturn is I don't necessarily like this word, and I know you don't either, but Saturn is the planet of karma and life lessons. Saturn rewards hard work and maturity throughout your life. Saturn will push you to learn lessons to do the hard work. So I think that karma word is not the word.
I would say every planet indicates karma equally, in my opinion, though I've heard that from many places as well. That's another traditional description. So Saturn traditionally is the big malefic. Interestingly, Saturn and Satan sound very similar, and from what I understand, like that is not by accident. That a long time ago, whenever the term Satan was created, I believe there was a correlation to Saturn. So Saturn was perceived as like the devil. And so part of that archetype then would be, when Saturn is active, so wherever Saturn is in your chart, the sign or house or planet that's aspecting it is going to be challenged. It's going to have hardship brought onto it. So like in medical astrology, then there, you would say the part of the body that corresponds to the sign that your Saturn is in is also then perhaps going to be weakened. I haven't found that to be true. I would say my part of the body that my Saturn happens to be in seems to be just fine. I would say yours is as well. So being the opposite of Jupiter, Saturn slows things down. It contains things. And so when you're living from the ego, you want to just get what you want right away. You don't want to have to work for it. So anything that Saturn is interacting with, what I find really, it just slows things down. And so people take that as like bad luck. What I would say is anything that Saturn is in aspect to, or the sign and house that it happens to be in, things will unfold in time. Like for me, Saturn's in my 5th house. I had my first child when I was 38 years old, which, is not young. It's not old, but it was something that came a little later in life than maybe it would for some other people, slightly older, though these days, maybe not as much as it would have been in the past. So yeah, typically when Saturn is in play, you have to work for it, whatever it is that it may be, would be indicated by, the sign in the house. Saturn is also the archetype of, if you think of Jupiter as like the free spirited, kind of party animal, fun loving, adventurer kind of thing. Saturn would be the archetype of somebody who goes to work, who takes life seriously, who takes their responsibilities very seriously, is not interested in playing and having fun because it's very focused on fulfilling whatever its duties may be. So if Jupiter kind of brings that kind of fun, joyful energy, which certainly in America, we, in my opinion, overvalue. It's like, why aren't you smiling? Like, why aren't you acting happy? Well, it's like, nobody's happy all the time. And those people who seem like they are, perhaps have a prominent Jupiter, but, it's not necessarily an authentic expression of how they are all the time. So yeah, Saturn tends to carry a little more of a serious demeanor. It may be inclined to err towards pessimism. It perhaps could bring about a bit of a kind of a mopiness and kind of like that Eeyore type quality, depending on how it's configured. But yeah, it calls us to be disciplined. So whatever it is, it's not necessarily you're working hard, you're working consistently. You just work every day, or throughout time, and things will unfold gradually to where that Jupiter energy touches it, and it things happen. And when Jupiter has that effect, it doesn't necessarily go well in the long run. It may be enjoyed in the period of time where that thing is unfolding and expanding really quickly, but it's not necessarily going to be for the best. So that's part of the Saturn dynamic is there's going to be setbacks. Things aren't necessarily going to work out the way you want them to, and you got to find a way. You got to keep going. And so then Saturn will definitely bring bad things, because a lot of people tend to give up. So part of that energy is to have your setbacks, to have things not work out the way you want them to, and to continue to move forward.
And, Saturn is ruled by the sign of Capricorn. And one of the things, again, in kind of more cookbook pop astrology that I think Saturn is associated with is the father energy. So I know a lot of times in kind of cookbook astrology, if you have, Sun square Saturn or something like that, it would be traditionally maybe interpreted that maybe you had a difficult childhood with your father, or you had a very...
But your father's a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically very authoritative, or,
And if your moon square is Saturn, then your mom's a jerk. Yeah. Which may be the case, though it may not be. It definitely does play out that way sometimes. So I didn't go into the planets that, so Saturn rules Capricorn. It would be in detriment in Cancer. It's exalted in Libra and in fall in Aries, and it's dignified, formally ruler of Aquarius. Then it would be in debility in Leo.
And do you think we could just talk a little bit about the Saturn return, even though I know we're not going over?
Yeah, and I think we should do a whole other video on that, but I'll touch on it briefly. So okay. Saturn's orbit is roughly 30 years. It could be anywhere from 28 to 31 years, depending on where it was in its retrograde portion when you're born. So if you think about everything I just said about Saturn, you can look at that first Saturn return when you're roughly 30 years old as the beginning of adulthood. And in my opinion, even in your late 20s, certainly mid 20s, but even late 20s, you're still not fully mature. I would say you're really not even fully mature until you're more like in your mid 40s, which I'm not there. And being a Capricorn and having a prominent Saturn Capricorn energy, I value maturity and kind of growth over time. And I can see where I still have a lot of room to grow. So you could say that really probably doesn't even then complete itself till your second Saturn return, which would be when you're roughly 60. At that point, you would be kind of like an elder, so to speak. So that first Saturn return would be like the beginning of your adulthood. The second Saturn cycle would be like your life as your career, perhaps raising children. And then the completion of that would then be the completion of your career, though, of course, people's careers can complete at any time. So very often people work well past their Saturn return. Some people will retire before that, but it's kind of that completion of that time period of when you're really kind of like working hard, so to speak. And then that third Saturn cycle, and now you're the elder, you're the advisor. For those who are young, you have time to kind of reflect on things, and hopefully by that point in your life, you've developed some wisdom, which you can share with those younger than you.
And, when we say the term return, what that means is that Saturn is returning to the same place as it was in your natal chart. Is that a correct definition?
Yeah, it's completed one orbit around the sun, in which case, yes, it would be returning to the point where it was in your chart. So for me, I was born with Saturn at the end of Scorpio. So then my Saturn return would be when Saturn transits through the end of Scorpio and crosses the degree in which it was when I was born.